Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
All right, my friends, I appreciate you tuning in today. Thank you for joining us here on this Monday as we move, well, ever so quickly into mid-May. Absolutely love this time of year, my friends. And it is, we're in the midst of this cold civil war here in this country, and I've got something to share with you today that it's predictable, but at the same time, it is still remarkable. Democrats are coming up with a plan, reportedly, thinking about anyway, coming up with a plan that helps them. It's wild. It is a wild plan to circumvent what has happened in the state of Virginia. And as I'm saying this, it's occurred to me that we didn't talk about this. It happened after I left you on Friday. The Supreme Court of Virginia ruled 4-3 in a 4-3 decision that the legislature there violated the Constitution. And basically, they said that the new maps that were created via referendum were unconstitutional, and the current maps are the maps they're going to have to use, at least until they can follow their rules, which effectively means, if that decision holds and the shenanigans that the left is, attempting to pull here, you talk about lawlessness and just insanity. If they're able to pull this off, they will be able to implement their maps. They don't have a big window. This is crazy, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, this again. You cannot compare what the Republicans are willing to do to get a political advantage with what the Democrats are willing to do. I've shared with you before. This is their religion. This is their God. This is everything to them. And you'll see what I mean when I explain this. It's wild stuff. It's wild stuff, my friends. But if they are unable to pull off this wild strategy, which I don't think that they can, but I, at the same time, put little past these folks. Their 10-1 map could be reinstated. As it now stands, it's a 6-5 map. So basically, they're looking to net 4 seats in Virginia. And if they can't do this, as of right now, they didn't do it. By the law, by their own constitution, they did not do this. But they're going to try one last attempt here. And it's nothing at all like what Republicans have done. Nothing at all. If people have been outspoken against redistricting, they 100% need to be against what Virginia Democrats are trying to do. There's no way you can be against a legislature acting within the responsibilities that have been granted it by the U.S. Constitution in the drawing of their districts. There's no way anyone with an ounce of integrity, and yes, I'm talking to you, Hoosier Republicans, who thought we were in the wrong for exercising our legitimate power to fight the abject evil that is manifest in the Democrat Party today. If you had a problem with that, there is no way you should not have a problem with this. But Todd, it's not Indiana. We have a different set of standards. Hogwash, my friends. Hogwash. These things affect your vote. They dilute your vote when we allow insanity to rule, empowering the side of the extreme, radical, delusional left. You are diluting the power of votes of the people who are actually trying to do good and save this great nation. So we'll get into that, my friends, as the program comes together here today. You know, one of the biggest challenges we as conservatives have is finding ways to ensure our values reflect or align with the way that we live our lives. Because listen, if your values are real, you think about those in real world scenarios. You don't just create something in some academic bubble, theoretical universe, and let it stay there. Your values, my friends, our values need to be reflected in society, or what is the point? Well, that includes the way we invest our money. And that's why I love what the team at 4-8 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values, so you are not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. They do the heavy lifting. All you have to do is a quick and easy assessment to decide, or to uncover, I should say, how your values align with your purpose and goals, how your investments and the values that those reflect align with those things. So they will give you the tools to do this quick and easy assessment. 48financial.com/Todd. That is the website, 48financial.com/Todd. That is where you can go to take the assessment and determine to what degree your current investments are aligned with your values. 4-8 Financial, because your money should work for your values, and certainly not against them, my friends. All right, let's look at this headline here. This is at redstate.com. You'll find this in lots of places if you want to go digging and looking. But let's get to the core of this. But the headline here is Democrats plot coup against Virginia Supreme Court in redistricting fight. This was written Saturday afternoon. Joe Cunningham at redstate.com. The Virginia Supreme Court's decision to throw out a voter-approved redistricting amendment that has House Democrats scrambling, and at least one option on the table would require blowing up the state's entire Supreme Court to get there. I kid you not. Let's get through this, but let me pause. And again, I want to compare and contrast. I want to juxtapose what Republicans have done and what Democrats have done. I want to compare briefly here what Republicans in Indiana refused to do, right? And five of those seven Republican state senators have recently, last week, lost their primary election. They paid the political consequence, and I say good, by the way. They paid the political consequence of refusing to do what we needed to do here in my state of Indiana. You might recall Indiana has there are 7 Republican members of Congress, U.S. Congress in our state. There are 2 Democrats. Republicans, again, this started back, again, I don't want to go through the history. I've done this recently, but you know that this was kind of started by Trump and his administration when they first went to Texas and said, hey, let's redistrict Texas here mid-decade. This is not normally done. Typically, we draw districts every 10 years at the beginning of a decade after the census is taken every 10 years, and the next census is scheduled to be taken here in 2030. So there's no census that triggered this. It was strictly political, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, you might personally say we shouldn't do it. Again, I would ask you to give us reasons why. I would ask you, I've gone through this. I don't want to do this and bore those of you who have heard me say this before, but tell us why the current districts are preferable to changing districts. What is it about the existing districts that is just morally superior to a new district? Tell me what it is about 7-2 in the state of Indiana, for example, that is something that is, I guess, holier than 9-0. Tell me what it is. Explain why. If you don't do that, what you're doing is simply saying change is the problem. Because if you can't tell me why the current map is superior to a new map, and the Constitution of the United States clearly gives state legislatures the power to draw the maps, you're leaving a massive lack of explanation on the table as to what it is. And we had Republicans in this state think that they were somehow virtuous by not pushing these maps through. I've heard from even some in this audience. I have an open invitation for anyone to come on here and to tell me why I'm wrong. No one has taken me up on this. People have emailed me clips of this and that, or, they'll make some comments on social media. Some people even telling me that they will come on when the time is right. Of course, that time never comes, hoping that I'll forget about it. But this is what I've run into. I don't know of anyone who's willing to articulate this and explain it. I will be nice about it. I'm going to ask questions that I don't think, candidly, you can answer if you fall in this category. And I will press you. I will ask the tough questions. And I think at the end of the conversation, you're going to realize, or at least the people listening are going to realize, that it is truly a political point of preference, meaning that if we have the political power to do it, and if we deem that it is necessary for the survival of this republic to do it, it is perfectly legitimate to do, and there is nothing that should stop us from doing it. I think that is the conclusion to draw, and I welcome, again, you can text me, 317-785-1030. Tell me if you want to come on, and of course you're going to have to be coherent for me to put you on here, but I'll certainly consider it. Or you can email Todd at toddhuffshow.com. No one has taken me up on that. Nobody has taken me up on that. Seems peculiar to me. But anyway, but that's what's happened here in this state. This happened back, last December, early this year, that time frame when this fight was going on in Indiana. And certain Republicans think that we took some sort of mythical moral high ground by not doing what needs to be done. And by the way, people will suffer as a result if the House goes to Democrats. People will suffer. I mean, I've explained this. I've exposed what the other side is. I spent a lot of time on this on an episode last week, and I don't want to repeat myself, but this is what happened. Now, Virginia sought to do the same thing, and I am remarkably consistent here. I said Virginia has the authority to redraw their maps the same way Indiana did, the same way Texas did, the same way California is working out through their referendum and so forth, the same way Texas has, or Tennessee or Missouri, or other states in the South that are soon to follow in the wake of the Calais case. So it's consistent. I'm not going to be here telling you why it's bad if Republicans or Democrats do it and good if Republicans. Bad if Democrats do it, good if Republicans do it. I'm not going to do that. I think it's important to be consistent. I don't like it when Democrats do it because it hurts our chances of, people with a brain and a conscience and an understanding of this country's history. It weakens their political power. And when the left redistricts, when Democrats redistrict, I think it empowers absolute lunacy and a godless, something that's absolutely godless and morally bankrupt. That's the radical left's worldview and political philosophy. And so that's what I think. I believe that that's the case, but they have the right to do it. Both sides do. Except if there are rules in your state that, by the passage of laws or even through the constitutional amendment to your state's constitution, then you have to follow those rules. And if you don't, you cannot do what you sought out to do. This is very, very simple. So going back to the article here, according to the New York Times, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York joined Virginia Democratic members of Congress on a call Saturday where lawmakers vented over Friday's ruling and weighed their options. Again, that ruling said in a 4-3 decision, which this article gets into briefly here, but in a 4-3 decision from the Virginia Supreme Court, that this congressional map did not follow the constitutional process. And dare I say this, it's pretty cut and dry. This is a pretty obvious decision. I had talked about this weeks before because I had shared with you after the referendum had passed, Ken Cuccinelli had come out and posted 4 reasons on X, I think it was on X, 4 reasons why Democrats were going to 4 reasons why I should say this referendum was going to simply be taken over, overruled, I should say, because they clearly have violated the law. There's really not a whole lot of room for interpretation here. What's wild to me is that it was a 4-3 decision and not a 7-0 decision. But that tells you where these other 3 justices on the Virginia State Supreme Court are coming from. So, going back to the article, this is talking about the conference call they had. They, the Democrats, did not land on a specific path forward, agreeing to consult with attorneys before making any moves. But one idea circulating on the call got people talking, using the just buckle up for this. You want to talk about lawlessness? You want to talk about an abuse of power? You want to talk about craziness? Listen to this. Listen to what they're one of these ideas for salvaging their 10-1 map in Virginia looks like. Just listen to this. Using the Democratic-controlled Virginia General Assembly to lower the mandatory retirement age for state Supreme Court justices, forcing out the current bench and replacing it with judges more favorable to Democratic redistricting goals. So what they're considering is they're saying, look, the youngest judge on the Supreme Court is 54 years old. And so what we're going to do, step 1, is we're going to pass a law that says the mandatory retirement age for a Supreme Court justice in the state of Virginia is 54, which means suddenly all of them have to retire by law. It is mandatory. If you're of the age of the youngest Supreme Court justice, you now have to retire. 54 years old. That's not that old, my friends, but this is just step 1. So the article then takes a little bit of a segue here, and I'm going to read this too because it's relevant to understanding this. It supports a lot of what I said, and I might have some additional context for you. But what the Virginia Supreme Court actually ruled, the court's 4-3 ruling issued May 8th, that of course was Friday, found Democrats violated the Virginia Constitution's process for placing amendments on the ballot. Under state law, a proposed constitutional amendment must pass the General Assembly twice. This is important, my friends, with an intervening general election between votes. So what that means is, number 1, first of all, there was an amendment passed to the Virginia state constitution that dealt with the process of redrawing congressional districts. So they couldn't just pass a law, they had to address the amendment making process. However, the Virginia state constitution has a very specific, I've gone through this before, but just for understanding here, why they want to basically get rid of all 7 of their Supreme Court justices. Think about this. Have you ever heard about this, anything like this before? Where all 7 justices, or all 9 if you look at the U.S. Supreme Court, whatever it is, where the state legislature or the U.S. Congress or whoever's, whatever branch of government or whatever level of government, state, federal, is involved, where people were talking about eliminating, quite literally, every current sitting justice on the Supreme Court, because that's what they're thinking of doing, at least according to reports. So, but the reason here, again, is that the Constitution has to be followed when you make an amendment or you change a current amendment to the state constitution in Virginia. And so there are certain timelines here. They have to have a vote, and then there has to be an election, and then they have to have another vote. That's the only way a constitutional amendment can be passed. So you have to have a new Congress come in your state, in the state of Virginia, after the vote on the amendment the first time. So they propose a constitutional amendment, the legislature votes on it. There then has to be an election in between there, presumably because they want to make sure that there's an election where people can be certain that that the people get to vote on the people they want voting for that amendment, or against that amendment. So there has to be an election in between there. This is important, an intervening general election. So Virginia Democrats cast their first vote on October 31st, 2025. So they passed the amendment in 2025 in the state legislature. Then they had an election that early voting began October 31st, 2025. That's when they voted on this measure. But the problem was early voting had already started for the House of Delegates in Virginia, with roughly, going back to the article here, 40% of ballots already cast. So almost half the people had voted. And the Constitution says there has to be an election in between these votes. So the court ruled that Virginia's general election includes the early voting period, not just election day, meaning Democrats had already missed their window. Well, no kidding. If early voting does not constitute the election, does not constitute the general election, what in the world is going on here? Of course it does. That's the process has been voted. People have process has been started. People are voting. The election is underway. That's the whole point of early voting. You have election day, sure, where people actually traditionally, we used to just have one day to vote. Now we have weeks to vote. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to have votes that run forever, elections that never cease to end, then there are consequences for that. And one of those is that you're in violation of your state's amendment-making process if you don't have everything meeting the requirement before the first day of early voting. And they did not. I've got to take a time out, though. More on this after the break, my friends. Sit tight. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Talking here about this crazy plan presented allegedly, reportedly, by Democrats in the state of Virginia. It's just remarkable to me. I'm waiting to hear from all the people in Indiana and elsewhere who thought that Republicans in Indiana were abusing their authority, were not being nice to the other political party by trying to redistrict here late last year, early this year, I guess, technically in January. I'm waiting for those folks to tell us how corrupt this is. This is, if you were against Indiana redistricting and not this process, you need to really, really have a long, hard thinking exercise where you just sit and think through your positions and how many of those positions are built upon being absolutely and totally partisan. This is unbelievable what they're talking about doing here. My friends, if you're dealing with discomfort or just tired of living off prescriptions, managing those side effects, you're not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals, a family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. No hype, no synthetics, no funny business, just the real deal done right. And Here's the key. Real kratom is tested. It's responsibly sourced. The horror stories that you've heard about kratom come from shady sellers and synthetic garbage that isn't even real kratom. So do your research, and once you're comfortable with the product, you can start with their kratom starter pack. Coupon code ToddHuff saves you 10%. Visit Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Okay, so let's get back to this article here. So the court ruled that Virginia's general election includes the early voting period, not just election day, meaning Democrats had already missed their window. Pretty cut and dry, right? Pretty cut and dry if you're following this. It's very straightforward what the court decided. What isn't straightforward is why the 3 people voted to uphold those maps, but that's another story for another day. The majority wrote that the constitutional violation, quote, incurably taints the resulting referendum vote and nullifies its legal efficacy. Absolutely right. Congratulations to the 4 justices there for figuring out the obvious. The decision leaves in place the current congressional map, which gives Democrats a 6-5 edge in Virginia's delegation. The amendment that voters approved 52-48 on April 21st would have drawn a new map, giving Democrats a 10-1 advantage, a net swing of 4 House seats going into the November midterms. Now remember, Democrats have lost seats here. They've lost seats in Texas. They've lost a seat in Tennessee. They lost maybe a seat or 2 in Missouri. They lost some seats in Texas. They've picked up seats in California, but they've largely, and they've lost this recent Supreme Court case, the Calais case, and they are reeling here. They thought that they were going to win Congress, and they still could. They still could win in the midterm elections. But the odds become increasingly against them if they don't get some victories like, well, what they tried to pull off in Virginia. Going back to the article here, according to the Virginia Mercury, the case had been working through the courts since a Tazewell County circuit judge ruled the amendment invalid in January. The state Supreme Court had allowed the April referendum to proceed while it reserved judgment on the underlying legal questions. So, but now they've ruled, and now they've said it cannot stand. So here's, again, picking back up on what we talked about kind of earlier about Democrats wanting to lower the mandatory retirement age for the Supreme Court in their state as a way to deal with this law. So here's the plan. The proposal Democrats are considering. The plan, as described by people who were on the call or briefed on it afterward, runs through several steps. Here we go. The first would invoke the Tazewell County Circuit Court ruling from January, which held that the 2026 constitutional amendment effort was invalid because county officials did not post the required notice at courthouses and other public locations 3 months before a general election. So they're going to say, listen, it wasn't our fault that we didn't meet the required timeline. It's because the administrative officials at the local courthouses, they didn't post the public notice 3 months before the election. So it's their fault. That's the first step. The next step, it says, from there, Democrats would argue that the 2020 amendment creating Virginia's bipartisan redistricting commission was similarly flawed, handing the legislature the power to draw congressional maps directly. So, after blaming court officials for not posting the notice that this would be held 3 months in advance, this vote, they are then going to say that you got to go back. It's a little confusing, but again, it has to be confusing because it's a wild, wild stretch of just craziness here. But Democrats are going to then say that the amendment that they were trying to change shouldn't have actually been passed anyway. Because, again, who has the responsibility or the power to draw congressional districts? That is state legislatures. So they're going to say that the process for creating the amendment, the original amendment, not the one that they just voted to change, the one that, well, it is the one that they voted to change, but not the recent vote. This is a vote on the amendment as to why it was there in the first place. So they've decided in their state to have this, bipartisan redistricting commission. And so they put it into their constitution. They're the ones that set it up. And so they wouldn't have had to go through the constitutional amendment process if they didn't have a constitutional amendment telling them how they were going to draw their state's districts. And so they're going to say that amendment, the process for creating that amendment was flawed, therefore making the original amendment, you following this? The original amendment is unconstitutional as well. And so now, since it's not legitimate, the state legislature can redraw congressional maps directly. The second, more dramatic piece would have, continuing in the article here, would have the Democrats in the General Assembly lower the mandatory retirement age for the Supreme Court. I referenced this off the top for the Virginia State Supreme Court justices from 73 to 54, the age of the youngest current justice. Because Virginia's General Assembly appoints judges and Democrats hold majorities in both chambers, the party could then fill the resulting vacancies with sympathetic appointees. A column in the Down Ballot, a progressive newsletter, floated a version of the idea Friday night, and it began circulating among lawmakers and congressional members shortly after. They're preparing to burn down their entire government over this. They are. They're prepared to burn it down. They're going to, at first, say that the courts are the ones that didn't make notice to begin with. They want to then say, well, the amendment that we passed back in 2020 was flawed. Got to throw that out. So now we have the power in the state legislature. And then, just as an added insurance to make sure that the court says you can't do these shenanigans either, they're going to lower the minimum retirement age to 54, basically making everyone on the current Supreme Court too old to serve in that capacity. And then they're going to appoint a bunch of radical leftist judges, which of course will have implications not just on this case, but on all sorts of cases to come in the future in the Commonwealth of Virginia, just to build in that added security blanket. So if there is a challenge to this, which inevitably there will be, they're going to have 7 justices who are just as woke as the lunatics in the Virginia legislature. This is the plan. Now, the new governor, Governor Abigail Spanberger, would need to sign any legislation lowering the retirement age. Her spokeswoman declined to comment to the Times, and Spanberger has not been briefed on the proposal. Again, reading from this article at redstate.com. Whew. Isn't this wild? But on top of all this, it has to be done quickly. Which I'll get to after the break. I'm just out of time here this segment, my friends. Sit tight. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back, my friends, in just a minute. Yeah, so where are the people? Where are the people who were against Indiana for redistricting or against these other states for exercising their constitutional authority to draw new districts? Where are they? Up in arms, protesting at state houses, hissing at people, as I had a woman hiss at me, which didn't bother me. But I got to tell you, it's one of the more entertaining things I've ever witnessed. It's sad. It really is. It's sad. But just from a perspective of her acting like a, I don't know. Do you want to say child? Do you want to say something more demonic? I don't know. But regardless, where are the folks? Where are the folks who were so upset at Indiana for trying this? I mentioned before the break, the clock is already running. They got it. Not only do they have to pull off some version of what I just talked about here today, they have to pull it off with relatively no time on the clock. And we'll get to that, my friends, in just a minute. But let's be honest, when your financial world starts getting a little more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics. From private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning, Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team to guide you every step of the way so that you can focus on what matters most: your family, your goals, your future. Want real confidence in your financial life? Well, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Jason and the team will take great care of you. Build your legacy, my friends. Secure your future. Okay. So, back to the article here. The clock is running. It says whatever Democrats decide, the calendar is not on their side. Stephen Koski, commissioner of the Virginia Department of Elections, warned in a court filing last month that any map changes after Tuesday, May 12th, that's tomorrow, by the way, will, quote, significantly increase the risk of the state being unable to properly prepare for its August 4th primary. That gives Democrats, at the time of this writing, by the way, it gives Democrats fewer than 72 hours if they intend to act. Now they have basically 24 hours. I don't know if they've started this. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I know time is of the essence and time is not on their side. Democratic leaders have also signaled they plan to appeal the state Supreme Court's ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court, though legal experts have cautioned their path may be a dead end. I can all but assure you, I cannot imagine, even if the court takes this up, the U.S. Supreme Court, even if they take this up, the idea that they are going to side with what the Democrats have done here when it's such a blatant and obvious disregard for following constitutional policies. Their state's constitution anyway. There's little to no way that this is going to be a viable path as well. And so they may have, and it's perfect. I remember getting the notification on Friday. You never know what's going to happen. And it was a 4-3 decision. So one of those justices could have flipped his or her vote and turned this whole thing on its head. But in a sane world, this is exactly the right decision. This is exactly the right decision. This is easy. This is cut and dry. But it goes to show you, again, there's apparently three activist judges on the Virginia State Supreme Court who are prepared to do whatever it takes, as long as it takes them, so long as it puts Democrats in positions of power to win elections. That's what they're after. And listen, I don't care. I mean, I do care because I don't want Democrats to win, but if the legislature they do have the power to do it unless they limit themselves as they did in Virginia. But if they decide to exercise legitimate power within the confines of their Constitution and within the confines of statutes, then they're perfectly capable and able to do this. But they aren't if there are rules that prevent them from doing so. This is easy to understand for those who are fair-minded about these things and who understand that the devil is in the details. So this is not good news for Democrats, and there's going to be more bad news on the redistricting front for them as we continue to move forward. There's now calls for Georgia to postpone its primary and redistrict there. We'll see what happens. I would like to see this happen. that could give Republicans favorable outcomes there. Alabama, South Carolina, or other states that might find themselves doing similar things. Tennessee just redistricted. We know Florida did as well. This entire thing, this is the irony is rich, and this is just, and I'm here for it. I love every second of this. There's nothing quite as satisfying to watch people who have abused their power, abused their authority. It is nothing quite so satisfying to me to watch them have loss after loss when the law is enforced and when Republicans actually have the intestinal fortitude to do what is necessary to fight and defeat these clowns. I've got to go, SDG.